Hey now, Adam.
What's up?
So, we're going to talk about how important it is, or whether it is important, for Hollywood to respect the characters that they make their movies off of.
Nice. What's his story about?
So, there's an interesting article that came out today. Taika Waititi had no interest in directing a Marvel movie, took Thor Ragnarok because he was poor, and it was a great opportunity to feed his kids.
Shock! Horror!
Okay, so let me just read a couple of his quotes from this article. He says, "You know what? I had no interest in doing one of those films," Waititi said. "It wasn't on my plan for my career as an auteur. But I was poor, and I just had a second child, and I thought, you know what? This would be a great opportunity to feed these children." Okay, so he's just doing it for money. He didn't care at all about Thor as a character, or seemingly even Marvel superheroes at all. Which,
right.
Fair enough. If
never touched a comic, never read a comic.
Right. So then he says,
got kids to feed. I got a mortgage to pay.
Listen,
give me that script.
There ain't no rest for the wicked, okay?
Right.
Then he says, and quote, "And Thor, let's face it was probably Marvel's least popular franchise. I've never read Thor comics as a kid. That was a comic I'd pick up and be like, ugh." And then I did some research on it, and I read one Thor comic or 18 pages or however long they are. I was still baffled by this character. Okay, so it sounds like even when he was tasked to do this movie, he didn't care to read or know anything about Thor.
So he basically has a disgust response at the character.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So this is This is the guy that they're entrusting this character that the fans love and adore and have had in their lives since they were just itty bitty kids to do their movie.
Yeah. Do you think it's important for Hollywood or anyone to respect these characters when they do movies based off them, or does it not matter?
Well, I think that's an interesting debate that people are having. I do feel like this could be part of what some people are calling the meaning crisis, right? Mm-hmm. Where at one time we had religion in our lives and you never had to worry about someone coming along and disrespecting your characters.
Oh no,
like
has
Jesus.
Thor replaced that religion?
Well, look, I think people do have some of that religious type fervor for these characters, which I can understand. Look, I grew up with Star Wars. As a kid, I had all the Star Wars action figures. I love Star Wars. Like Star Wars, I couldn't wait for another Star Wars movie to come out. So I get it. And then to have someone come along and basically crap all over your childhood memories is painful. So I do respect that. It does, when you put it this way, it does have kind of a little bit of a sacrilegious feel to it, that some sort of commercial character is taking over for something that's supposed to be a sacred part of someone's life. But I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Well, I understand what you're saying when you talk about like the religious aspect of it. I think too many people will be put off by that language. I think maybe the way to conceptualize it, so some people don't get annoyed, is like, when you watch Star Wars, people idolize or they look at these characters as like heroes, maybe to emulate. And so if you're a big fan of Spider-Man or Thor or whatever, in your mind, it's like this heroic mythic figure, not on the same level as like Jesus or something or religion, but it's a heroic mythic figure that you want to emulate or look up to. And so, then you get annoyed if that character is transformed to a different medium, and the medium, usually a movie, they don't really care about the depiction of the character that lines up with what's in your head. And I do think it is important for movies or anything to respect the original character, because even if, so like obviously when they're making these Thor movies, the Thor movies are going to have a broader appeal than the comics, obviously. Right. But the only reason they're making that movie in the first place is because of the original fans. And so I do understand that there could be some conflict because they have to change some things to broaden the appeal. But I think you can always creatively still do that, broaden the appeal of a character, but still have it retain whatever makes it special to the fans because you're only making the movie because there's a fan base in the first place. And I think that's why a lot of these fans get pissed off because they're like, you're only making a Thor movie, a Spider-Man movie, an Iron Man movie, whatever the movies are. You're only going to make one of these movies because of me, because I supported this property, I supported this character for years and years and years and years. And now suddenly it's like, oh, you're too cool for me, right?
Yeah. No, and I love what you say about the archetypes because that is so important. People are looking at these characters as some archetype that they can emulate in their personal life. And if they've actually done that, sort of internalized this character knows right from wrong, and I know right from wrong through the example of this character. And then all of a sudden this character comes out in a movie by a guy who completely doesn't understand that archetype and is crapping all over it indiscriminately. You're kind of going, you're getting the character wrong, and you're crapping on a little piece of me because I've emulated this character and it's been a influential part of my life. So I mean, I do understand that, and I think these corporations, I mean, obviously they're just interested in making money, but I do think at some level they have to take this into account. Otherwise, it's going to interfere with their bottom line.
Well, there's another kind of wrinkle to this that's interesting to me, which is that, the third, Taika Waititi did two of these movies. He did Thor Ragnarok, which is the third one. He did Thor Love and Thunder, which is the fourth one. And I really like Thor Ragnarok a lot.
So did I.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best standalone Marvel movies. Definitely my favorite Thor movie. So I think it's great, and it's kind of interesting because we're kind of talking about, how he doesn't really care about Thor as a character and how that's seemingly bad, and yet he was able to produce this movie that was like really fantastic. And a part of this is because I don't have any strong feelings about Thor as a character. Before the Marvel movies came out, I don't think I've ever read a Thor comic. I'd read other comics. I was a big Spider-Man fan, and other superheroes, but Thor was never someone I knew about or had any strong feelings with. So when I watched the first two Thor movies, I was just kind of bored by them. And then Thor Ragnarok comes along, and I was like, oh, this is fantastic. This is great. It's hilarious. And it's interesting that he's able to produce that movie, which seems to be universally loved. And then at the same token, the sequel seems to be like a lot of people don't like it, Thor Love and Thunder. And I look at that and I say, what's going on here? And it's kind of like one of these your strength is your weakness situations where, because he doesn't know a lot about the character, maybe that's able to allow him to be more creative and take it in a direction that it needed to be to make the movie successful, like the third one. But then at the same token, like, I'm assuming when he did Thor Ragnarok, they're like, okay, he still had either internal restrictions from himself, because he's like, oh, I've never done this before, I've never done a superhero movie, or he had external restrictions where the Marvel executives are more like looking over his shoulder, seeing what he was doing. And then when Thor Ragnarok did so well, both those internal restrictions and external restrictions go away because they're like, oh, it did so wonderful. Everyone loved it. Let him do whatever he wants. Maybe he even gets a big head. Like, oh, I did this movie. So great. And that leads him to make it, what I call going too far syndrome. Like Thor, Love and Thunder took all the elements that made Ragnarok good and they just went way too far with them. They made them too goofy, too funny. The movie lost all sense of seriousness. The tone made no sense. You have in the beginning of the movie, like the saddest origin story for a villain ever. And then it's like immediately undercut with a joke in a like completely unsettling and bizarre way that just hits you, the audience, like, what am I looking at here?
Right. So the success of Ragnarok basically got the suits out of his hair. During Ragnarok, they're standing around saying, look, we just hired this guy because he's cheap. Look, he's never done one of these movies before. And we got to micromanage him, right? So they're looking over his shoulder every step of the way, screening test copies of the film and stuff like that. But then the next one, it's a giant success. And they're like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. We can get out of his way. And that's when everything kind of falls apart is what
maybe. I mean, there's some people who are really creative and they can create really great stuff, but they need to be limited. And the classic example,
I know these people.
Yes. And the classic example for this is, to me, is Invader Zim, which was made by Jonah Vasquez, who Invader Zim is one of my favorite cartoon shows. I love that cartoon. And if you read his other things, his comics that he did before Invader Zim, like you can see the same humor is there, the same spark of creativity is there. But since Jonan himself personally thinks that like extreme gore and extreme gross stuff is really funny, like the comics, they just all go too far to the point of like the average person reads this like, this isn't funny. It's just too gross. It's too graphic. It goes too far. But then when he's on Nickelodeon, he has like all these restrictions because it's Nickelodeon. Everything's highly censored. Everything has to be for children. And that kind of like cuts away like kind of his extreme taste, which don't align with most other people's. And it kind of actually forces him to be more creative instead of just going for like the gross out stuff. And then you get something brilliant like Invader Zim. And, I feel like probably something like that happened with Thor, Love and Thunder. Like once the restrictions, whether they were his own restrictions or external restrictions, once he was let out of the box to do whatever he wanted, it just went crazy.
Yeah, this argument has been made about Star Wars as well. The original Star Wars movies, there was some studio restrictions on, and then the prequels, obviously
Yes.
George Lucas could do whatever he wanted to.
Right,
So I think there's like lots of examples of this artist gaining too much clout, too much power, and really losing it, not being able to produce good films because the restraints are taken off, which is a good thing. So one more thing, before we finish up here, why even say this? Like, why? Why come out and say, look, I didn't really give a crap about your IP. I just did it for the money. Like, shouldn't there be some kind of intuition that might just piss off fans needlessly?
Well,
what's going on there?
I think it depends on the reception of the movie. Like if it was just Thor Ragnarok, that's all he did, and everyone liked it, then you'd be like, oh, it's like kind of like a funny, weird, serendipitous situation. Or if it was like a situation where it's like, oh, I didn't know anything or care about it, but then once I got into it, I liked it, right? Like then that's
why wouldn't you say that?
Right? Well, because obviously that's not what happened. So
it's oversharing honesty. Is that what's going on here?
Well, I think oversharing honesty is fine if it's only that it comes off, to me, it only comes off poorly because Thor Love and Thunder was bad.
Right.
That's what makes it, you're like, oh, because then you're like, well, maybe you should care about the character, because maybe if you did care about the character, you take things a little bit more seriously, right? So is opposed to making it so goofy.
So is it being said defensively then? Is that your postulation? It's like...
I think he just thought it was a funny thing to say. That was probably true. So he said it. It's on a podcast. I think that's all that was going on there.
Oh, okay.
I mean, he doesn't care. They were talking about...
He's like, I'm rich come back now. My kids are eating caviar for breakfast.
Well, so because they were asking him like in the podcast, like if he was going to come back for the next Thor. And he was saying no, because he's got like way too much other projects lined up. So
it was a great opportunity for him.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely worked out. Definitely. All
right. Any final thoughts?
That's it.
Hi, you just listened to a Sitch and Adam recorded video. That's right, we're doing Monday through Friday deep dive recorded videos now. And of course, we're still doing our live streams. Our live streams are on Sunday and Tuesday starting at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. And you can super chat us, or you can join the channel. Subscribe to this channel right here to watch the live show or watch more of our awesome deep dive videos.